When the Mayflower arrived in Plymouth in the early 17th century, the natives may have had a very different opinion of who were the civilized folks and who were the primitives. The colonists hardly bathed, unlike the natives who were proud of their salubrious habits. And we all know what happened after the Thanksgiving dinner, as pilgrims not only gifted natives the food, but also a plethora of diseases. On the other hand, were natives' hands as clean, both figuratively and literally, as popular history would like you to believe? Or did they have some dirty laundry too? Welcome to Nutty History, and today we are looking at what hygiene practices were like for Native Americans during the pre-colonial times. Why don't you bathe? When pilgrims landed in Plymouth, their first encounter in the Americas was with the Wampanoag people, who were clearly not impressed with European hygiene habits. According to the 1965 biography of a Wampanoag member of the Patuxet Nation named Tisquantum, or as Europeans called him, Squanto, he tried to convert Europeans into daily bathers. But his mission didn't yield much success, unlike the other missionaries that arrived later in the Americas. It was absolutely horrid for Native Americans to learn that Europeans were not fans of bathing at all. In fact, Squanto got the opportunity to visit Spain and England, and he couldn't believe it when he heard that the then French King Louis XIV had taken only 3 baths in his entire life. And it wasn't just royalty. While in Europe, Squanto learned that Europeans hated bathing as much as your pet cat. They might wash their faces and hands on a weekly basis, or if they were truly worried about hygiene, then they'd go as far as washing them daily. But bathing? Get out of here. Europeans at that time truly believed that nobody in their right mind would let water touch the rest of their body. In fact, the separatist pilgrims and the Puritans that followed them to America believed that submerging the whole self in water was unhealthy. Also, taking off all your clothes? How dare you to even think something like that? Scandalous. On the other hand, Native Americans were true savages who would take off all their clothes every day and scrub themselves clean. Can you imagine that? So uncivilized. For them, bathing was an important ritual to maintain a harmonious relationship with not only nature but also the spiritual realm. They seemed to know the importance of regular bathing and washing to keep the diseases at bay and purify themselves inside out to maintain materialistic and spiritual balance. Native Americans practiced regular bathing, washed their hands often, and tried to keep their bodies clean as much as possible. Even back in that age, they knew how necessary the significance of sanitation was to prevent illness and infection from spreading. The Native communities promoted overall wellness. Native Americans didn't have the know-how to produce soap like the rest of the world was doing back then, using fat and lye. But they were proficient in using herbs and plants medicinally and for hygiene as well. Native Americans used yucca, soapweed, and soapberry to produce lather by mixing them with water. Some tribes also loved using finely powdered clay to cleanse themselves with a mud bath. They also used steeping medicinal herbs to create infusions and decoctions for fancy bathing, like how we use bath bombs and bathing oils. But I know as much as you'd love to know about the pre-colonial range of toiletries, there is a burning question in the back of your head at this moment. We are talking about how much Native Americans emphasized sanitation, but their downfall was caused by the diseases that Europeans brought with them. How did that happen? That's not corn on the cob. We can't have a video on hygiene without talking about toilet hygiene. Before Europeans arrived in America, natives didn't have the privilege to know about the existence of toilet paper that was invented in China. Frankly, even Europeans weren't much aware of TP at that time either. But they were not using ancient Roman poop sticks or ancient Greek pebbles anymore as well. Truth is, they were happy to wipe with anything they could find. Leaves, twigs, grass, whatever they got their hands on. But we are talking about Native American hygiene here. Were they using beaver tails or just scrubbing it off with their maces like the Europeans? Sounds a little exotic, right? Native Americans back then were using dried cobs of corn, an idea that sounds not that different from poop sticks if I'm being honest. They would remove the husk and the silk of the cob that would then be left to dry. This would make its surface relatively smooth, making it suitable for wiping. In fact, when early European settlers of America learned this specific use of cob, they also adopted it over leaves, twigs, and whatnot. The thing is, it's a shame that unlike Native Americans, it took settlers quite some time to get into the habit of washing their hands after their business. But we do hope you wash your hands regularly and especially after using the toilet. The unexpected threat. Not only were Native Americans the champions of sanitation, but we also owe them for a number of medicinal inventions that revolutionized healthcare. Today, we credit a Scottish doctor named Alexander Wood for inventing hypodermic syringes. But the indigenous people of America were using sharpened and hollowed-out bird bones connected with animal bladders to hold and inject fluids into human bodies for a very long time. They would use these primeval syringes to inject medicines and also irrigate wounds. But records show that these innovative syringes were also used to clean ears and administer enemas. The indigenous people of pre-colonized America were also the pioneers of pain relief. They discovered that ingesting willow bark works great as a pain reliever and anti-inflammatory agent because it contains salicin. Well, the Native Americans didn't know that it was the chemical salicin that made willow bark a great pain reliever. It was the modern scientists who figured out that part. Salicin, when ingested, generates salicylic acid, and it's the prime ingredient of everyone's favorite, aspirin. Along with willow barks, Native Americans also used to use various herbs to create ointments and sunscreen too. Native Americans also made small plugs out of dogwood to treat hemorrhoids by moistening, compressing, and administering the insertion. People use dogwood even in modern times for externally treating wounds. So how come such a hygienic and medically sound society fell to European diseases? Well, firstly, the carriers of smallpox, measles, influenza, and the rest of the Pandora's box that Europeans brought to the Americas were completely alien to the immunity system of the indigenous population. Poor Buster didn't even have a chance to create antibodies soon enough. Also, the European settlements weren't much of a help as they were often established in areas with higher population densities than what Native American societies were accustomed to. This way, the densely populated Europeans facilitated the rapid spread of disease by passing it around like the rolled up thingy with the plants in it. Don't lie, I know you know. In addition to that, diseases not only spread through lack of hygiene, but they simply also spread due to airborne transmission, physical proximity, and exchanging goods and services. Before Native Americans knew it, their near impenetrable fortress of immunity was breached in so many ways. Natural oils and deodorants. Among the indigenous population of pre-colonized America, 4 sacred plant-based products were considered sacred medicines. Tobacco, cedar, sage, and sweetgrass had a cultural value to spiritual, physical, and emotional well-being. Additionally, more plant-based products such as sunflower and jojoba were also used to derive oils that were used to moisturize their skin, condition their hair, or protect against dryness and environmental elements. Cedar was often consumed in tea as a treatment for arthritis, tuberculosis, and fevers. Essential oils derived from cedar were also used to fight fungal infections. The natives considered sweetgrass the hair of Mother Earth, and it was used as both tea and essential oil to treat the common cold, a sore throat, and simply a flavor ingredient in food and alcoholic beverages. The incense made from sweetgrass was to keep their communities and homes fresh, and its blood-thinning property was also used to reduce stress. Native Americans also used cedar and sweetgrass to create paste and powders that they could apply externally on their bodies to enhance body odor and reduce the smell of sweat and stench. It also helped to mask their presence during hunting, but mostly kept them smelling fresh. Watch and wash your mouth. Dental hygiene in the 17th century was considered a risky business in Europe, as was bathing. The guy who's considered the father of modern dentistry, Dr. Pierre Fauchard, warned people back then to not clean their teeth. Actually, the French doctor wasn't entirely wrong. The Europeans used to use rags rolled in salt or soot to clean their teeth, which wasn't very hygienic in the first place. Instead, he encouraged people to use toothpicks or a sponge soaked in water, or preferably brandy. When pilgrims arrived in America, the dental hygiene of indigenous Americans was a matter of illumination for them. They used chewing sticks primarily, which was a method that was also popular in contemporary China and Southeast Asia. Some tribes crushed herbs like sage, mint, thyme, myrrh, and other naturally found substances to create tooth powder that would be used as a paste by mixing it with water. Fresh breath was also as important as clean teeth and gums, so they would boil the herbs like thyme, mint, and myrrh with a plant called gold thread to create an infusion that they could use as a mouthwash. You know, I actually know some people watching that need to start making this. Gold thread was also used for pain relief for teething infants and to treat tooth infections. Native Americans also had their own versions of dentists who had specialized tools to treat tooth decay and administer tooth extraction when necessary, These dental probes and crude forceps were manufactured using animal bones and antlers. The extraction procedure was typically performed by these dentists who had specialized knowledge or skills within the community. But there was no special college for dentistry, as is the case in modern times. Any medicine man or healers in the indigenous tribe could perform dentistry duties back then. The Columbian Exchange. Christopher Columbus may not have been the first sailor to arrive at the New World shore, but his name is attached to the exchange of ideas, food, crops, population, and most infamously, diseases between the New World and the Old World after his voyage in 1492. It's not controversial to say that this exchange definitely was biased. While the Old World gained precious metals and crops such as potatoes, tomatoes, maize, cacao, chili peppers, and cassava, the New World got the shorter end of the stick by being invaded by a whole lot of illnesses. But the New World wasn't entirely innocent. It is believed that during the original voyage of Columbus, his sailors became carriers of an infamous disease that was responsible for starting the tradition of wig wearing among the elite classes of Europe. You know which one I'm talking about, right? Thanks for watching Nutty History, and we hope you enjoyed this video. Our writers put a lot of effort into bringing you authentic and genuine content that they write after extensive research. Of course, we are humans and sometimes we do make mistakes, but that doesn't take away how much honest effort goes into creating content without any kind of automatic generation. And we are thankful for all of your genuine support. Now, if you'd like to keep supporting this hard work, please like and share our videos. And if you're not part of our community, consider subscribing and ringing that bell. Both of them are free of charge. It'll help us to keep delivering you quality content and improving with every new video. What's the best way to get rid of lice? Simple. Eat them as a midday snack. No. That's not our recommendation. But it was par for the course in ancient China, along with using urine to wash your armpits. Today on Nutty History, we're covering the nitty-gritty details of what hygiene was like in ancient China, a civilization that invented many of the same self-care tools we use today. Let's get funky. Smelling good was a very important part of hygiene in ancient China. Body odor was perceived as a symbol of barbarism, which adds up considering Chinese sovereignty back then was threatened by the Mongols, who loathed bath time. The Chinese built a wall, a pretty great one, to keep the Mongols away, but to keep their own stench at bay, they were required to bathe. However, this presented an issue. There was a misconception in ancient China that bathing every day invited sickness. The superstition was born in the northern parts of the country, where people would not touch cold water, let alone bathe in winter, to avoid catching a cold. Eventually, thanks to Taoism, the precaution became a superstition. But for a time, whether or not to bathe presented quite a conundrum, so they kind of reached a happy medium by creating a rule to bathe at least once every 5 days. But it seems this level of grime and stench wasn't acceptable to the Chinese nobility, as they were willing to pay top dollar for additional hygiene measures. A huge chunk of their paycheck would go to what they called a subsidy for clothing and hair washing. In addition, women of rich families would tie aromatic bags around their waist to keep them smelling fresh. They would also spice up their baths with ingredients such as roots, chrysanthemums, peppers, and ginger. The poorer people of ancient China unfortunately didn't have the luxury of additional options to cleanse themselves or smell better. They would have the option of rubbing urine in their armpits as a disinfectant, a practice recommended once a year on New Year's Day. Hey, it's free. In ancient China, hairs were called thread-like things of troubles. Buddhist monks shaved their heads completely to keep said troubles away, while everyone else resorted to combing them as a way to clear their troubled minds. These combs were made of bamboo, wood, and animal bones. The combs were also decorated with beautiful colored patterns, and expensive ones had rulers and landscapes or animals drawn on them. Jiangsu province acclaimed the honor of creating the finest Chinese combs in the 3rd and 4th century and was dubbed the home of combs. To cleanse their hair, people of early Chinese civilization would bathe and shampoo their hair with rice water, which contained starch, proteins, and vitamins. It helped them to remove oil stains and revitalize the scalp and hair. There was also Chinese honey locust, which was effectively used as a shampoo as well as a facial cleanser. If you think putting bug paste in your hair and on your face is disgusting, just wait. Poor ancient Chinese took it a step further and ate their own lice. Lack of baths had lice running rampant among peasants, and as they were constantly plucking lice from themselves, they would just put them down the hatch. Hey, gotta get that protein. Oral hygiene was a matter of prime importance in ancient China. You were not allowed to have bad breath in the presence of the emperor, and thus it was mandatory to suck on a clove anytime you found yourself in the court of the emperor. Chinese people also came up with the inventive idea of weaving horsehair on a stick to make a toothbrush. But before they created that fanciness, plain old sticks would do the trick. Chinese and Indians were first to use the willow branch for dental hygiene. The method was to first take a small swath of willow branches and rinse it clean. Then one end was chewed until the branch fibers were exposed and the end became hairy. And boom, a DIY toothbrush. Good to know next time you forget to pack your toiletries. Down the line, someone came up with the idea of piercing 2 holes on one end of their brushing stick and sticking horsehair through for bristles. These toothbrushes weren't actually very different from what we use today. Rich people tended to use horse bristles, softer and more comfortable for brushing teeth. The more affordable option was pig hair, which had a harder texture but came pretty cheap. To finish off their pearly whites, the ancient Chinese would also sprinkle some of their homemade tooth powder to enhance the cleaning. Tea, salt, vinegar, and poria fungus were the commonly used oral hygiene ingredients for toothpaste, tooth powder, and mouthwash. The ancient Chinese were as resourceful as they were innovative. A lot of farmers back then built special kinds of outhouses over a pig pen to relieve themselves. The excrement would fall directly in the pig's trough, and for a lucky pig, this was a tasty snack. Ugh. Even a millennia later, when public toilets became a thing, farmers would still travel to the city to collect the public's deposits and repurpose it as cheap fertilizer. Feces weren't just a treat for cattle and crops. Ancient Chinese healers used human excrement for medicinal purposes as well. A healthy person's fermented stool was mixed in a concoction called yellow soup and fed to a person ailing from diarrhea, and they were supposed to drink every last drop of this liquid feces. That's a tough pill to swallow. But before you balk, this method worked surprisingly well. The healthy bacteria in the stool would get rid of the bad bacteria in the patient's body. The same concept is used today to treat C. diff, a deadly disease, but in ancient China, this was just listed as a remedy for the runs. Urine wasn't left out of the equation either. It was used as an egg preservative, hormones, and of course, deodorant. But the major accomplishment of Chinese civilization was the moment they invented papyrus, because now they had a soft, slim sheet to wipe their tush with, toilet paper. The ancient Chinese were so excited they could now enjoy going, they went TP wild. The exact time when toilet paper was invented is still speculative, as it wasn't an often talked about topic. But according to an Arabic traveler's journal of the time, it created a bit of a mess. Without a disposable method, the used toilet paper was left out in the open, in a heap that would go so high it could resemble a mountain. So, what do you think? With toothbrushes, toilet paper, and scented baths, could you adjust your sanitary habits if you time travel back to ancient China? Let us know in the comments.
Why do you take a shower? To be clean, to look nice, or to prove that you are in the best shape of your life? You usually pick up your dirt shampoo and metal scraper in the shower, right? No? Well, then the world has changed quite a bit since ancient Greece. In ancient Greece, hygiene was nothing like what it looks like today. But I doubt you've even imagined it like this. Hello, and welcome back to Nutty History. Today, we're going to be talking about what hygiene was like during ancient Grecian times. The ancient Greeks bathed simply for aesthetic reasons. They wanted to look clean, and their culture prized a strong athletic body. With that in mind, they were not trying to rid themselves of germs or viruses through bathing. For this reason, during 1200 to 200 BC, it is believed that they only used water and not soap, even though soap was around during this time. It was used for cleaning cooking utensils and not thought of as having important medicinal properties. Instead of soap, the Greeks would clean any visible dirt with a mixture of oil and an abrasive substance like sand, pumice, blocks of clay, and ashes. They would rub this substance all over their bodies. The Greeks would use a curved metal tool called a strigil to scrape off the oil and dirt. Both men and women would use a strigil, and it was deemed an important tool to have for visual cleanliness. It was even more important if you were an athlete. Typically, athletes would apply oil to their bodies before heading to the gym or working out. Once they were done exercising, they would use the strigil to scrape off the oil, sweat, and dirt, and even blood from their bodies. It was believed that the athletes must have some extra special dirt and bodily fluids as they had achieved such an admirable physical form. Remember, the ancient Greeks prized the perfect physical physique as being closer to the gods. The muck scraped off their bodies would be saved and was thought to have special medicinal powers. It would be used as an ingredient in various salves and poultices and sold throughout the community. Around 600 BC, the ancient Greeks started setting up bathhouses. Bathhouses became such an important part of daily life that there are many vases or works of art from this time period depicting bathhouses, or what one would do in a bathhouse. According to the Homeric epos, the Greeks typically used cold water first, then hot water. There's a mention in other works of literature about public and private bathhouses, the latter requiring a fee to enter. Now, the fees were typically small, allowing everyone in the city to afford entrance. Bathhouses were such an important part of daily life that some politicians would pay the entrance fees for a bathhouse for a period of time as part of their political campaign. Men and women used separate parts of the bathhouses, with women having to use a smaller part of the bath complex or having access to the complex at different hours than the men. The women would typically visit in the morning while paying a higher fee, and men would be allowed entrance in the afternoon and evenings. Typically, the bathhouses would be located near places where the Greeks would exercise. These bathhouses served many functions beyond getting clean. A lot of times, the bathhouses were used for socialization and community. People were able to access different pools or procedures based on their needs. Various works of art from the time period depict multiple baths of varying size and purposes in the bathhouses, like hot and cold baths or baths just for your feet. Attendees could walk around, exercise, or even get a snack and drink while they visited the bathhouse. They also served a purpose as far as water conservation. The idea was to conserve water by having everyone bathing together, instead of each person bathing individually in their homes. As mentioned earlier, bathing was used for aesthetic purposes, meaning just to rinse off visible dirt. The Greeks would also come to the bathhouses to cool down after exercise or on hot days. Wealthy or important people typically had private baths at their homes, but they would still visit bathhouses as a means of socialization and camaraderie. Today, we think of bathing as a private thing, and it's so hard to conceive the idea of one of our most private acts being a means of socialization. Imagine bathing with your friends or colleagues and numerous strangers every day. The ancient Greeks believed illnesses in the body came from an imbalance of the four humors in the body: blood, black bile, yellow bile, and phlegm. They didn't think that hygiene was necessary to prevent illnesses. Bathing in ancient Greece was all about beauty, elegance, and self-respect. Even as time progressed and indoor plumbing became more widespread, the communal bathhouses continued to be widely popular in ancient Greece due to its important social impact. We may think of toilet paper as commonplace, but it didn't show up in Europe until around the 16th century. People had been living in Greece long before that, and they needed a way to clean up after using a bathroom. If the family was fortunate enough, they would use a sponge attached to a stick called a pterosorium to clean themselves with, similar to the ancient Romans. If flowing water wasn't available, a bucket of salt water or vinegar water would be used to splash onto one's private areas. However, not every family or every Greek would have access to this. Instead, it was common for the Greeks to clean themselves using stones. In the 1960s, archaeologists uncovered a series of small stone discs called pessoi near the communal toilets. A pile of stones would be kept in the lavatories and used for cleaning yourself after a bowel movement. These stones had to be just right in shape and texture as to not injure the person. With that being said, there's an ancient Greek saying, 3 stones are enough to wipe, to encourage a more conservative approach in the bathroom. It's even been discovered that some Greeks would write the name of their enemies on the stones or on shards or ceramic and use that to wipe. Public bathrooms in ancient Greece are not the same as today. Similar to bathhouses, they were meant to be a communal experience. Picture any public toilet you've been to, but without the stalls, and each toilet is much closer together. There was no privacy. That'll give you a better picture of public toilets in ancient Greece. A series of holes would be cut into benches, installed over the top of the plumbing that runs below. The waste channels below were very deep for that time, and the toilets could become very chilly. It's been noted that wealthy individuals would send their slaves down to the toilets ahead of time to warm the seat for them. If you thought bathing in public was scandalous, imagine using the toilets with all your friends and strangers surrounding you. Hey Milos, how's it going? Better. As long as there have been people on Earth, there has been eating. Food residues can become stuck to your teeth or get lodged in spaces between your teeth. Having good oral hygiene can prevent numerous illnesses, including tooth decay and infection. However, the modern toothbrush was not mass-produced until 1780. So, what did humans do before that? Centuries before the modern toothbrush, the ancient Greeks had some very ingenious ideas. The simplest way to clean your teeth is with your finger. There are two methods that were primarily used by the Greeks. Either the finger was wrapped in cotton cloth and rubbed all over the teeth, or the finger was dipped in a type of powder substance and used to clean the teeth. A lot of these ancient powders, like charcoal, baking soda, or alum, are the base for modern toothpaste. The Greeks were onto something. The ancient Greeks were surrounded by nature, and they would turn to it before the advent of modern medicine. The laurel tree is native to Greece and has antiseptic and therapeutic properties. You may recognize the laurel branches as those worn around the heads of athletes during the ancient Olympics. The laurel tree's essential oils are antiseptic and stimulate blood circulation to the gums. This promotes cleanliness and regeneration of the gum tissue. After chewing on a branch of the laurel tree, the Greeks would be left with a clean mouth and a fresh scent. Other times, fresh, fragrant herbs were used to cleanse the teeth and mouth after a meal. They would also be used as a breath freshener throughout the day. Popular herbs for the ancient Greeks to use were fennel, parsley, and lovage. They would create a mixture of these herbs to cleanse the teeth and freshen the breath. The ancient Greeks had some pretty creative and interesting ideas when it came to hygiene. Some of their practices have influenced our modern-day lives, and others, well, we've left them in the past. We hope you enjoyed learning a bit more about ancient Greece. The past was pretty dirty, and people did weird things in the name of hygiene. You'd be astonished by the stuff people use instead of soap. But then again, you'd be surprised how old soap really is. I mean, there's evidence that the ancient Babylonians had recipes for it as early as 2800 BC. But times change, and so do ideas about what's healthy and what's not. Here's what hygiene was like for royalty throughout history. Don't mess with the Great Khan's water. The Mongols might have loved water even more than Cyrus the Great. Genghis Khan in particular was a lover of water. He apparently bathed in hot springs whenever he could and instituted some particularly strict and downright tyrannical rules when it came to how people used it. The Great Khan thought rightly that water was a precious resource and it needed to be conserved and protected. In Mongol culture, they would apparently put water in their mouths before using it to wash their hair because they figured that this would clean the water and prevent illness or infection. But Genghis took things to another level. He set down an edict that stated if anyone touched their face with water and then let that water go back to the original water source, they'd be killed. Now, it was harsh for sure, but it probably did prevent contamination of the water supply. The Mongols were also pretty good at finding and using water sources like wells, springs, and rivers. They would often construct wells and irrigation systems to bring water to their settlements and camps. They were also experts at using water for transportation and built bridges and boats to cross rivers and other bodies of water as they went about conquering nearly all of Asia and the Middle East to become the largest contiguous land empire in history. But then there was gout. Gout was apparently a pretty big problem for the Mongols. Gout basically is a type of arthritis that usually affects the toes and can lead to some pretty nasty infections that could potentially turn deadly if it's left untreated. Kublai Khan, the founder of the Mongol Yuan dynasty in China, was said to have suffered pretty severe gout. One weird Mongol remedy for it, which Kublai Khan may or may not have tried out, was sticking your foot into the chest of a dead horse or cow. Now, I'm not sure how effective this actually was. It was definitely not the most savory medical practice in history, but the Mongols thought that the heat and pressure inside the horse's chest would draw out the toxins that caused the gout. Other traditional and less gross Mongolian remedies for gout included the use of different herbs and acupuncture. Some of the herbs they used included safflower, which was thought to promote blood circulation and reduce pain, and angelica root, which was thought to have anti-inflammatory properties. Wine baths. Jesus turned water into wine, but Mary, Queen of Scots, liked to bathe in it. She was a devout Catholic after all. And the blood of Christ she drank every Sunday during worship took on a whole new meaning for the Queen
who also happened to live at a pretty bloody point in history. Her demise was a bloody one too. We might have a drinking contest on our hands. Do I want a Bloody Mary, a glass of wine, or an entire bath of wine with a Bloody Mary floating inside it? Hold on a second, I just threw up in my mouth a little bit. I'll be right back. Mary, Queen of Scots, as her name suggests, was the Queen of Scotland during and after the reign of Henry VIII. When Henry's daughter, Elizabeth I, came to power, Mary was the centerpiece of several attempts to take out Elizabeth and install the Queen of Scots as the head of England. This was because Elizabeth was a Protestant and a lot of Catholics didn't like her policies. Mary spent many of the last years of her life in prison because of all these hits she put out on the Queen of England, so she probably had a lot of time on her hands. And what better way to spend it than soaking and relaxing in a bath? Mary's bath was a strange one, though. She had a habit of bathing in a tub of wine. There's a lot of speculation about the extent to which she did take these wine baths, but there are some modern equivalents that can help us understand the reasoning behind it. There's a modern trend called venotherapy, where, true to the name, vino is used as therapy. And as weird as it sounds, wine is used as some spa treatments, and it's thought to be pretty good for the skin. In addition to giving you a good buzz, wine has high levels of antioxidants, including something called resveratrol, which can help promote healthy skin cell growth and neutralize things called free radicals, which are unstable molecules created from normal metabolic processes that damage cell membranes. Now quit scrolling on your phone. There's going to be a test on this a little bit later. Now I'm pretty sure there's a song about it. The natural acids found in wine can also apparently help to exfoliate and brighten the skin, leaving it looking smooth and radiant, just like Mary's, at least until she was killed for treason. Meiji soap. The Meiji Restoration, which started in 1868, was a time of pretty significant political, social, and economic change in Japan. The new government that emerged after the overthrow of the shogunate system was determined to modernize and westernize Japan. It was the only way the leaders of the new government figured that the only way for Japan to survive in a quickly industrializing world. Before the Meiji Restoration, Japan was very isolated from the rest of the world, like very isolated. It was even a crime for a while for most people to leave the country, and any approaching ships were fired upon if they tried to enter any of Japan's harbors. The nation definitely developed unique traditions and customs because of this, but it also left it vulnerable. To prevent any possibility of colonization or foreign conquest, Emperor Meiji, the man behind the eponymous Meiji Restoration, launched a series of reforms to modernize the country and make it more competitive on the global stage. One of the changes that Meiji introduced was the use of soap for personal hygiene. Now before this, most Japanese people were more into traditional methods like using oil and rice bran to clean their skin. Soap wasn't very widely used, and many people were not familiar with its benefits. To be fair, hygiene in Japan before the Meiji Restoration was pretty dang good compared to the rest of the world at the time. Japanese royalty and nobility were really into being clean and had a lot of hygiene practices that would make what was going on in Tudor and Victorian England seem like a bunch of pigs rolling around in their own mess. One notable practice was the use of the furo, or furo, a wooden bathtub filled with hot water for daily cleansing. The furo was used for both washing the body and relaxing, and it was common for family members to share the same bath water. This practice was seen as a way to strengthen family bonds and promote harmony. Japanese royalty and nobility also took care of their teeth. They cleaned them with a small bamboo brush called a miswak, which was dipped in water or mouthwash made from either sake or salt water. But Emperor Meiji was really into the West, and despite the fact that the Japanese were already pretty clean, he introduced soap anyway because, well, he was really into the West. The Roman urine tax. Money doesn't stink. If you gotta use a bathroom, this might be a good time to do it. Just don't brush your teeth with it afterwards. It might sound gross now, but in Roman times, mouthwash was, well, number one. In ancient Rome, urine was a pretty valuable commodity that was used for a bunch of things. It was a cleaning agent, a bleaching agent for textiles, a medicine, and yeah, a mouthwash. The use of urine was so widespread during the reigns of Emperor Nero and Vespasian that a tax was even levied on its collection and sale. It even inspired a common phrase in Latin at the time, pecunia non olet, or money doesn't stink. Under Emperor Vespasian, who ruled from AD 69 to 79, the urine tax was collected from public urinals, which were built throughout the city to prevent public urination on the streets. These urinals were constructed with a system of channels that directed the urine to collection tanks where it was then sold to tanners and other craftsmen who used it in their work. Urine was known to be a good leather softener, among its many other apparent uses. One of those other uses was personal hygiene, and in particular its use as a teeth whitener. Yeah, you with the yellow teeth over there watching this, please don't try it. The ammonia in urine was thought to have whitening properties, and people would rinse their mouths with urine to remove stains from their teeth. Now, while this may seem unappetizing to our modern heathen sensibilities, it was a pretty common practice in ancient Rome. And some of the best stuff came from Portugal. You might even call Portugal the #1 urine exporter of ancient Europe. The Romans thought that wine gulped down by the Portuguese was of a particularly high quality, and that this helped out with the quality of their urine. This belief was probably based on the fact that the urine produced after consuming wine has a higher concentration of uric acid, which can be used to make a better quality dye, or in a lot of cases, whiter teeth. This belief led to a thriving trade in Portuguese urine, and a whole lot of it was imported into Rome and other parts of the empire. The use of urine for hygiene and industrial purposes continued on into the Middle Ages, and it was really only replaced in the 19th century when synthetic chemicals became the best, or at least the least gross, source of ammonia. Building baths. Bathhouses were super popular throughout different Chinese dynasties. Marco Polo was impressed by them when he visited the southern Song dynasty in the 13th century, marveling that there were over 3,000 of them in the capital city of Kinsei. But a couple hundred years later, the 5th emperor of the Qing dynasty, Qianlong, took things to another level. Emperor Qianlong was apparently pretty obsessed with cleanliness and hygiene. He ruled during the 18th century and started up quite a few public health initiatives. He was probably one of the few people at the time who made the connection between good hygiene practices and disease prevention, and then connected it to the overall well-being of the population. So Qianlong went about building a vast network of public baths and toilet facilities throughout the country. They were designed to provide access to clean water for bathing and to help people maintain good hygiene habits. He also introduced regulations to promote cleanliness and sanitation, which included laws that required people to clean their streets and homes on a regular basis. The emperor himself was known for taking multiple baths a day, and would often change his clothes a few times a day too. He also had a team of attendants who were responsible for keeping his personal spaces clean and making sure that he always had access to clean water. Like a lot of emperors in China, Qianlong was also a patron of the arts, and he had a tendency to combine his passion for hygiene with his passion for art. He commissioned paintings and calligraphy pieces that promoted cleanliness and personal hygiene, kind of like one of these signs, but more artsy. He also sponsored the production of books and educational materials that taught people about good hygiene practices. And before Qianlong, the Forbidden City was probably as filthy as Versailles. Beijing's massive palace complex that was made up of nearly 1,000 buildings didn't have a single toilet before Qianlong came along. The royals would use things called closest tools, which were basically just boxes with holes in them that maids would bring in for the nobility to do their business, and then splash a bunch of perfume on top and transport it out of the city. But when the emperor's mother got sick, he figured she could use some toilets. So he ordered the construction of 3 of them, which were built adjacent to the palace complex. They were made of carved and lacquered wood and were equipped with a system to flush waste away. The toilet rooms were also equipped with copper pipes that brought in clean water for washing. After the toilets were installed, other members of the imperial family and high-ranking officials were eventually granted permission to use them. Still, there could have been between 30,000 and 100,000 people living in the Forbidden City at any given time, and 3 toilets probably wasn't enough. The world's first dentist. Did you know how beautiful Egyptian pharaohs' teeth were? Dentistry in ancient Egypt was a highly developed field, and there were a lot of dentists who were good at keeping the royals' pearly whites pearly white. One dentist in particular, Hesire, also known as Hesi-Ra, is thought to be the first dentist in the entire world. Hesire was a high-ranking official who served as the physician and dentist to Pharaoh Djoser, who ruled during the 3rd dynasty in 2600 BC. Hesire's tomb in Saqqara contains a number of inscriptions that provide insight into his work as a dentist, including his use of various tools like dental drills and forceps. The ancient Egyptians had a pretty deep understanding of dental anatomy and were skilled at treating a whole range of dental problems, including cavities, abscesses, and gum disease. They had tons of techniques and materials for treating teeth, including gold and ivory that were used to make fillings and crowns. They also used herbs and other natural remedies to alleviate pain and treat dental problems. Louis the Dirty. There are a lot of rumors out there about Louis XIV. Some say he only bathed once in his life, some say twice, some say 3 times. Some flip the script and say he was actually obsessed with hygiene. He bathed on a regular basis and had pretty good hygiene habits. Pretty good for the times, at least. So who are we going to believe here? We can probably go by what hygiene in general was like in 17th century France, and specifically in the court of Versailles, which Louis XIV made his royal residence in the late 1660s. The lack of hygiene at Versailles was a pretty big problem, particularly in the early years of the palace's construction. Versailles was originally a hunting lodge built by Louis XIII in 1623, but Louis XIV took a liking to it a few decades later and decided to build it up into a full-scale palace. But Versailles was basically built on a marsh, which made it difficult to keep clean. The palace's plumbing and sewage systems were pretty primitive, and mostly entailed people throwing feces out of windows into surrounding gardens and moats. Now, unfortunate passersby may have been caught with an unwelcome aerial assault from time to time. The palace was also overcrowded. Hundreds of people were living and working really close to each other in a palace that still wasn't finished. It made disease pretty rampant, and stuff like smallpox and typhus was common. Even members of the royal family kicked the bucket because of it. Because of all this, the water at the palace was understandably pretty dirty, and it kind of made sense that bathing wasn't so common. Instead, Louis and a lot of royalty and nobility during the 17th century figured that wearing and sleeping in white linens was the best option for cleaning your skin of quote-unquote impurities. It's a practice that can actually be traced back to ancient Egypt, and we'll get into Egypt in a little bit. It was also a thing in Greece and Rome. It was common for royals and nobility to wear white linen shirts beneath their outer, frilly, ornately patterned clothing. These garments were called smocks or shifts and were super breathable and comfortable to wear. These white linen undies were thought to absorb the body's impurities, which apparently helped keep all that noble skin clean and fresh. The linen acted as a natural absorbent. It drew sweat and other bodily fluids away from the skin and trapped them in the fabric like a magic cleanse. Then they'd wash the linens, or if you live in the US these days, you would just throw them away and buy some new ones. There's no real modern science behind how effective this was, but in hot and humid climates, it did and does certainly help reduce the risk of things like rashes and skin infections. The king of perfume. So Louis was definitely into linen, but without a shower, linen can only go so far. I mean, you still need to mask the remaining and probably pretty offensive body odor with something. Louis was the king of France, but he was also the king of perfume. He even rinsed his fine linen smocks in the stuff. But remember, odor and perfume are never a good marriage. Just saying. Louis XIV loved perfume so much that he commissioned perfumers, yeah, that's a term, to make him different fragrances for each day of the week. He also insisted on having his shirts perfumed with a special scent called Aqua Angeli. It was made up of a blend of natural ingredients including aloes, nutmeg, something called storix, which is like a balsam type thing, and cloves, which were all boiled together in rose water. The resulting fragrance was a spicy and sweet one that would linger around on the king's clothing and would probably make the eyes of those around him tear up, not from emotion, but because it smelled horrible. Clean Egyptians. Ancient Egypt was incredibly advanced in so many ways, and hygiene was definitely one of them. I mean, you would just assume that the people who built the pyramids were also pretty aware that cleanliness was important. And for the Egyptians, cleanliness was even attached to godliness, or at least the afterlife. The Egyptian Book of the Dead is a collection of spells and instructions for the afterlife that was created during the New Kingdom period of ancient Egypt. The book has quite a few stipulations and rituals that were vital for those who had left this earthly realm to successfully navigate the afterlife. And there was a big emphasis on the deceased being clean and presentable, or else they wouldn't be able to speak certain spells when they reached the afterlife. Spells that would help them along their way, kind of like Harry Potter's Patronus. Not sure how hygiene was at Hogwarts, but for the Egyptians, cleanliness was seen as a way to purify yourself before the gods. In ancient Egypt, cleanliness and personal hygiene were highly valued. Egyptians took daily baths in the Nile and used a whole slew of cosmetics and fragrances to maintain their appearance and hygiene. They used scented oils and ointments to prevent body odor and to protect their skin from the harsh Egyptian sun. I mean, that Egyptian sun did not play. Pharaohs, in particular, were known for having pretty elaborate hygiene rituals. Pharaoh Ramses III apparently bathed in perfume water every day and had a special team of attendants who were responsible for applying his cosmetics and his oils. You can't forget the oils. Cleopatra was known to take baths in donkey milk to keep her skin soft, and she even reportedly had the sails of her ships doused in perfume so she could make some particularly fragrant trips abroad. Cyrus the Great's water. Cyrus the Great was pretty great. The Persian king and founder of the Achaemenid Empire in the 6th century BC stormed across Central Asia, the Middle East, and the Levant, gobbling up territory and creating one of the mightiest empires in world history. But with all his military bravado, he was also a stickler for sanitation, particularly clean water. Cyrus understood that clean drinking water was essential for the health of his troops and the success of his campaigns, so he made sure his armies always had some. He built canals, aqueducts, and other infrastructure to make transporting it easier. He also encouraged his soldiers to maintain good personal hygiene habits like washing their hands and bathing regularly. Cyrus's water obsession was so grand that even the Greek historian Herodotus noticed it. He wrote a lot about Cyrus and noted that the king would apparently drink water only from one river called Coaspes. Kind of a picky fella, huh? To make sure he always had a fresh supply of this very specific water, Cyrus had his army followed by wagons loaded with silver vessels filled with boiled water from the river. It was a pretty significant logistical challenge, but Cyrus was into that high-quality H2O, and he believed that water was crucial to maintaining the health and morale of his troops. The emphasis on hygiene wasn't just limited to his military campaigns. Cyrus also implemented quite a few public health measures in his cities, which included building public baths and providing clean drinking water to the population. He believed that good hygiene was essential for the well-being of his people, and that it was a responsibility of the ruler to make sure that his subjects had access to clean water and sanitation. He recognized the importance of good hygiene and clean water way before it was fully understood how contaminated water and poor sanitation could cause illness. Turkish baths. Now, I don't know if you've been to a Turkish bathhouse before, but they're pretty intense. They basically cover you in soap at one point and then they beat you up. But the bathhouses themselves are really beautiful, and a lot of them were built by the guy who conquered Constantinople from the Byzantine Empire and turned it into Istanbul, Mehmet II, also known as Mehmet the Conqueror. During the Ottoman Empire, hygiene for royals was taken pretty seriously. Bathing was seen as a crucial aspect of personal hygiene and self-care. The Ottoman royal family, including the sultans and their households, had access to private bathhouses that were so luxurious and elaborate that any billionaire today would start salivating. They were typically decorated with marble, adorned with intricate tilework, and included hot and cold pools, perfect for relaxing after a tough siege. Bathhouses were also popular for the general public, and Mehmet II, the aforementioned conqueror of Constantinople, built a lot of them in his newly acquired city when he took it in 1453 at the ripe old age of 21. He even had a special team of architects and builders whose job was constructing all these bathhouses. Personal hygiene habits for the royals included regular bathing, obvious by this point, and also using scented oils and perfumes. They also had servants who were responsible for maintaining their personal hygiene and did things like cut hair and nails and gave massages. Like the Egyptians, Ottoman rulers also valued dental hygiene. They used something called miswak, which was a twig from a tree called Salvadora persica, to make the twigs into rudimentary toothbrushes. Smile, Mehmet, you just conquered Constantinople. So let me ask you something. Would you stick your gout-ridden toe into the carcass of a horse? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more nutty history. The moment humans decided to stop wandering, hunting, and gathering whatever they could find to eat and settle down, they faced a new, unexpected challenge: to keep their surroundings clean. Before the days of civilization, humans could just do their business, make some mess, and then move on, leaving nature to take care of it. But nature's work is slow, so when humans built their permanent homes and called land their homes, they had to strap on their skin boots and had to take responsibility for the mess they made from there on. From Sumerians and Egyptians to Victorians and Versailles and further into the 20th century, let's find out what hygiene was like throughout history. The dawn of sanitation. Sumerians, one of the earliest settlers who founded the oldest known city of Eridu, were not that great at keeping things sanitary. In fact, Eridu grew to be one of the dirtiest cities known, as waste just piled up over generations. People would just chuck their waste out in the open, and there was no waste disposal system that they could come up with.
Interestingly, Sumerians were well aware of how unhygienic and polluted surroundings invite diseases and ailments despite knowing nothing about germs. Still, they were clueless about how to combat the problem of growing filth mounds on their street. Maybe they should have also considered lowering the age of retirement.
Interestingly, Sumerians were quite careful when it came to their personal hygiene. It has been discovered that Babylonians invented soap as early as 2800 BC. Remains of antique soap have been found in clay cylinders at many historic sites of Mesopotamia. Some of these soap containers also had labels inscribed on them. The most common writing on them is "fats boiled with ashes," which was the most common way of making soap for a long time in history. It is believed that Mesopotamians made the very first soap by cooking fatty acids from cows, sheep, and goats mixed with water, an alkaline substance, and wood ashes. In his book, Naturalis Historia, the Roman scholar Pliny the Elder also described soap as a pomade made of tallow that was derived from beef fat and ash.
In a lot of our previous videos, we've often talked about how Egyptians were not only big fans of hygiene, but put a lot of stress on their appearance and self-care, and they also were obsessed with cosmetics. Being close to the Nile River, Egyptians loved to keep things sanitary, and they bathed on a regular. Evidence of their bathing routines can be found in Ebers Papyrus, a medical text scroll that was produced around 1500 BC. It had info on how one can use animal fat and vegetable oils in combination with salt to create soap. The soap created with instructions from Ebers Papyrus was not only used for washing and bathing, but was also considered beneficial for treating skin conditions.
Egyptians were also perhaps the earliest civilization to come up with the idea of indoor washrooms. But they forgot an important detail: running water. They had toilets and bathing areas built inside houses, but they also had to carry water from the Nile River to use for these indoor toilets. Obviously, only the rich Egyptians were able to afford to have a servant that would do the job to bring water from the river for them. This was the invention of the job water carriers, which remained a common job in the Middle Ages, as well as in the early modern ages until plumbing became a common thing all around the world. To this day, people are forced to carry water into their homes in some remote areas of the world. Lack of running water was a huge problem back in Egypt too, so you can imagine how bad these washrooms must have smelled after somebody would do their business. And to make it worse, like Sumerians, they had to get rid of this waste by throwing it out in the open. We can only imagine how bad it would be for someone who would be roaming in the city of Memphis, marveling at the colorful and lavish architecture of the city, unable to tilt their neck down in fear of missing some beautiful sight, and then, splat! They stepped in some rich Egyptian's doo-doo. Ugh, gross!
The communal dumps or irrigation canals caused vermin and diseases to grow and spread in both Sumerian civilization and the Egyptian civilization. This is why the plague was such a common occurrence in older civilizations and played a big part in defining their gods and stories in their mythologies. Let the water flow.
However, other early civilizations found bringing water to them easier instead of the other way around. You see, people in the Indian subcontinent and on the island of Crete understood the real meaning of the saying, "You can bring a horse to water." While the early Mediterranean civilization suffered due to a lack of knowledge about plumbing, the Bronze Age of civilization of the ancient Indus Valley was prominent in hydraulic engineering. Indus Valley civilization residents built their houses with dried mud bricks, or clay bricks, using mud as cement. They also built public baths and private baths in the urban areas, and for such baths to function properly, they needed a sewage system.
To accomplish that, they built underground drains. Their secret to getting rid of the filth was highly advanced architecture for their time. These drains were built with precisely laid bricks, which constituted a sophisticated water management that was connected with multiple reservoirs. Now, this drainage system wasn't only connected with public establishments, but it also allowed connecting houses through smaller drains that would dump the waste into wider public drains. And they accomplished all of this in 1500 BC.
If that fact doesn't blow your mind, consider this. Double-story and multiple-story houses have been found in Mohenjo-Daro, and the Indus Valley people were equipped with the knowledge to not only build enclosed terracotta pipes and open chutes to empty water bathrooms at higher stories, but they also had ways to carry water up there. The cities of Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, and the recently discovered Rakhigarh offer the earliest evidence of urban sanitation. In comparison, the West was lacking so much when it came to plumbing that when a flush was first used in London, Queen Victoria jumped from the toilet seat and ran away after hearing the roar of the flush dumping water. She vowed to never use a modern toilet again. The urban plan of the Indus Valley civilization involved building wells in the commune areas of the residential blocks to supply water. They had a room set aside for bathing and a toilet with wastewater directed towards covered drains that lined up with the major streets. Devices such as shadoofs and sakias were used to lift water to ground level. Ruins like Mohenjo-Daro in Pakistan and Dalavriya in Gujarat, India, had settlements with some of the ancient world's most sophisticated sewage systems. They included drainage channels, rainwater harvesting, and street ducts. Step wells have been used in the Indian subcontinent for ages. Many courtyard houses had both a washing platform, and they would also build a dedicated toilet and waste-disposing hole with a clay vessel placed atop it that would be tilted to drop water into the hole and flush the waste towards the drain. However, to achieve this, they had to be in close proximity to water bodies, and that brought their end too, since nobody knows what ended the Indus civilization, but a catastrophic flood is considered the most plausible cause. Minoans of Crete Island took everything Indus Valley people invented and then they took it a step further. They built multi-story complexes, which for ease archaeologists refer to as palaces. Palaces were actually distribution centers for large quantities of goods like olive oil and wine and grains. The architecture of these palaces was extraordinary and well ahead of its time. These palaces had colonnaded courtyards, sliding doors, and external staircases. The monumental stone buildings were braced with wood beams. It was during the early Bronze Age, somewhere between 3500 BC to 2100 BC, that Minoans developed a systematic evolution of water management. The Palace Minos of the city of Knossos had the most elaborate terracotta pipe water management that is known to us now. It wasn't just a drainage system like the Indus Valley. The water technologies at the island of Crete included running water within the palaces and other settlements, drainage systems, piping systems, rainwater harvesting, and other technologies.
Terracotta pipes served a variety of functions for the Minoans. They could convey either wastewater, fresh water from local springs, or stormwater collected from roofs. Then they carried this water to reservoir systems, palaces, sewage and drainage systems, or public water supply networks, such as public fountains or an open space from a spring, as was the case in the town of Zakro.
A setup from Myrto Pyrgo utilized a terracotta pipe of rectangular shape to supply the nearby cistern system with rainwater collected from roofs. These pipes were also used in aqueducts. Minoan aqueducts were basically of two kinds: the natural gravity flow system that can be found in Malya and Talisos, and the closed pressurized pipe system used in other cities. The closed-type water distribution in Minoan Crete was obviously evident from the use of terracotta pipes that were found at the palaces of Knossos and Talisos. But later more were discovered at the palaces of Phistos and Palekustro, Gornia, Lykastos, and Zakro.
Stones and sticks.
From the late Bronze Age to Hellenistic times, the West learned the importance of baths. The ancient Greeks understood how regular bathing correlates with better health, but before they made that connection, they had baths that were basically a quick dip into a tub of ice-cold water. The people of Laconica, near Sparta, were the first to invent hot air baths. Laconica baths warmed with hot coals or rocks soon became a thing of luxury among Greek nobility. Over time, this inspired them to build large public bathhouses in almost every city. But when it comes to the toilets, somehow Greece took a step, or should we say multiple steps back from what the Minoans had achieved a few hundred years ago. Instead of having running water in their homes, Hellenistic Greece came up with a different solution to wipe their behinds that perhaps could be considered the reason why most of the world uses toilet paper today instead of bidets. Now, toilet paper feels nicer on the rear, but it wasn't invented during the times of Greeks, and using papyrus in that fashion may have angered the Egyptians. So ancient Greeks chose the next best option: pebbles.
Okay, obviously I'm being sarcastic, but how does the rough, sharp-edged, and coarse texture of tiny rocks seem like a good choice for these Greeks who created philosophy? Now, to add to that, ancient Greek restroom equipment were nothing more than bench seats with a hole. In public restrooms, people sat right next to each other with no walls or dividers. Eventually, even middle-class homes had their own restrooms and flushing toilets, but at least the Greeks had not forgotten how to build a drainage system, as the Minoans did back in the day.
In our video about what beauty was like in ancient Greece, we talked about how pale skin and blonde hair were all the rage. Funny how people travel to Greece these days to get a tan. So naturally, Greeks had a sun-kissed body, but they wanted a more North European look. To achieve that, they would apply a foundation. In the beginning, around 1000 BC, they would just lace themselves with chalk. You heard that right. What can be more pale than white powdered chalk? No matter how much, that was bad for their respiratory system. The Greeks were so obsessed about looking like a ghost that they later replaced chalk with more toxic lead powder in 200 BC. For oral hygiene, Greeks chewed mastic, a plant resin derived from the mastic tree to keep their breath fresh and maintain teeth cleanliness. The Greeks also used twigs as toothpicks and brushes to promote oral hygiene. The word hygiene also comes from the Greek god Hygiene, who was the daughter of the god of medicine, Asclepius. She was the goddess of health, and Greek physicians dedicated entire schools to the art of health. Romans also paid a lot of importance to oral hygiene, so much so that they were willing to put anything in their mouth to keep it clean and healthy. Now in the present day, I don't think anybody would put urine in their mouths, but Romans were fascinated by its composition. Urine contains a wide array of important minerals and chemicals such as phosphorus and potassium. Even though Romans had no idea about these two minerals, they somehow figured out that whatever was in the urine would help to make their teeth whiter and prevent decay. Now, who was the first person to try that and keep trying it until they discovered the benefits of it? And it wasn't just human urine they were using, but animals too. They not only used it as a mouthwash, but it was also the main ingredient of their toothpaste.
Romans also ditched the idea of using pebbles like the Greeks and came up with something softer and more sophisticated: a sponge. Anna Olga Kozlovsky-Ostro, an anthropologist at Brandeis University, considers herself the official queen of latrines because she spent a good part of her career learning about ancient Roman gutters.
Now, the word latrine, or latrina in Latin, was used to describe a private toilet in someone's home, usually constructed over a cesspit. Public toilets were called forica. They were often attached to public baths whose water was used to flush down the filth. Like Greeks, Romans too had no problem with sitting with others in close quarters. The toga made it easy to maintain privacy in such a scenario than pulling the pants down. There was also the question of stink, but it seems Romans had fewer inhibitions than people today. Once done with their dumps, the sponge came into the picture, but get this, nobody had a private sponge. They were as communal as playgrounds. These sea sponges used for cleaning Roman behinds were attached to a stick, and the gutter supplied clean flowing water to dip the sponges in. The sponge stick was called a tersorium, which literally meant a wiping thing. But today, people like to call it the poop stick. Because of the communal nature of tersorium, shared butt wiping meant shared diseases too. If one of the forica visitors had intestinal worms, that meant all the others would carry them home for sure. Additionally, the lack of good light and cramped spaces meant people would often miss the hole. Forica were not well maintained either, so walking into a public toilet in ancient Rome was no better than walking into a toilet at a rave club. Now, it's hard to say if Romans washed their hands after doing their business or not. Maybe they dipped their fingers into an amphora by the door. Maybe they didn't. There is a possibility that in some parts of the empire they did, and in some parts they did not. Egyptians, for one, were very responsible for it because of living in a drier climate. They always kept their hands clean.
Ooh, some nice filth.
Big King, come on. He hasn't got all over him.
When it comes to hygiene, no era has got a bad rep like the Middle Ages. Every piece of media loves to portray medieval-age peasants covered in filth and grime. Now, the blame for this stereotype goes to Queen Isabella of Castile. She supposedly boasted that she had bathed only twice in her life, on the day she was born and on the day she married Ferdinand of Aragon.
Whew. The myth about the Middle Ages people not bathing comes from the times of the Black Death, when medieval doctors cautioned people against bathing, because they felt that by bathing in hot water, bodies would be exposed to diseases as pores would open. Also, they didn't want people congregated in bathhouses during the spread of sickness. The reason behind it was that public baths often reuse water for multiple people. However, they were also aware that bathing would help in curing sickness, and they prescribed it for conditions ranging from bladder stones to melancholy. It is believed that rich people mostly bathed on a regular and actually spent a lot of money to make bathing a luxury experience. I know you're thinking of Geralt of Rivia in a bathtub now. Stop it! King John, for example, traveled with a bathtub and had a bathman under his employment, and he liked to take about 10 baths every 6 months. Edward III installed new taps for his Westminster bath chamber, which gave him access to both hot and cold running water. Medieval people were also aware of the importance of good dental hygiene. They were advised to rinse their teeth with water when waking up to wash off any mucus that had built up overnight. Unlike the Roman times, Urine was no longer the choice of oral hygiene. It was now the washing detergent for clothes. However, getting rid of waste was once again a hassle in the Middle Ages too. Somehow toilets lost their appeal and chamber pots became all the rage. Also, it was decided that emptying these chamber pots would be a woman's job, and they would throw the contents over a balcony or out of a window while screaming a warning to avoid ruining somebody else's morning. This practice was also used later in the Palace of Versailles, a palace built so far from any water settlement that they had no choice but to decorate the gardens of the beautiful palace with heaps of excrement. Even if one was careful enough to not let a chamber pot rain on them or step into the filth, the disgusting stink was still everywhere. Men and women would wear small bags around their noses to keep the stench away, and they'd fill these bags with flowers and other fragrances that would help dampen the smell. We can all be thankful to have Febreze nowadays. However, for men, the profession of poop was a matter of career advancement. If one could let go of their integrity, the groom of the king's stool was the most degrading but also rewarding job of medieval times. The position was first created by Henry VIII, who was too overweight to reach around, and it became a highly regarded position. Sir William Compton, Henry's groom of the king's stool, became a close friend and confidant of the king.
It was a crappy job to wipe the rear of another man, but it also granted you knighthood for having the bravery to do so. And not just anyone could become the groom of the stool. To get this prize gig, one needed a serious connection. There was no backdooring this opportunity.
The problem of waste management was so bad that by the time of Henry VIII, royals would move all over the year between their multiple palaces so that their last residence could be cleared out of all the stench, wasted food, heaps of excrement, and infestation of all sorts of vermin. For the lower class, life with vermin and diseases was quite normal. To deal with vermin, they would line their floor with hay, but that just invited insects in to make their home.
The filthiest palaces.
The filth at the Grand Golden Palace of Versailles was as much a part of it as the sun symbol of the royal dynasty. The population at the property was always somewhere between 1,000 to 5,000, and the royal staff needed almost a small army to keep it clean with very little help. Managing such a palace was so bad that the noble occupants were asked to take care of their own apartments.
Meanwhile, the halls and hallways of Versailles also became toilets for the residents as there were so few washrooms for so many people. The chamber pots were usually filled to the brim most of the time and would leak into the walls of lower floors through ceilings. Women would have to pull down a section of their clothing to pee where they stood, while some men urinated off the balustrade in the middle of the royal chapel.
Then, of course, there was the matter of bathing. Thanks to some healers of the 15th and 16th centuries, bathing had become a controversial topic in Europe, with them theorizing that bathing attracts diseases. That reduced the frequency of bathing in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries to less than a week in Europe, but that doesn't necessarily mean people were filthy back then. By their own standards, they were relatively clean. Most of them were, at least. When getting out of bed, washing one's hands and face was standard, and a quick wash of the rest of the body followed in the form of rubbing. Some use a wet cloth for this, some preferred to be rubbed down with perfumes, and others used what was considered to be the safest, alcohol. Louis XIV, in particular, was rubbed down with clothes soaked in alcohol every day. However, dental hygiene took the biggest hit during these centuries as people of Versailles in Victorian times invented processed sugar, and the clock officially chimed 2:30. Get it? Tooth hurty? I'm just reading what they type here, man. Dental hygiene plummeted as the art of confectionery evolved rapidly until the science of modern dentistry came along.
This was also the period when France became the country of pleasant odors and perfumes. They developed new methods of perfuming people and places. Now, some worked and some, well, they didn't work. Often they would infuse strong essential oils into fountains and other everyday objects to help clear the stench. The smelling box was also another French product that made France the pioneer of the perfuming industry. It was a box holding fabric soaked in liquid fragrances. The most revolutionary development in modern history's hygiene came with running water in the 19th century. Within a few decades, fresh water was accessible to many, and an organized trash disposal system was shaping up. This helped bathing and hygiene become normalized again. Things started turning around in America too as they began installing sewers and expanding access to water as well. Philadelphia saw the first commercial deodorant being launched in 1888, and since then we have never looked back as the modern market is filled with pharmaceuticals and cosmetics that make us cleaner than ever. Hope you enjoyed the entire history of hygiene throughout history. Please share the video and don't forget to like and subscribe.
Thanks for watching Nutty History.